Welcome to the Inclusion Think Tank podcast, where we talk about inclusive education, why it works, and how to make it happen. A note from the host. As this and several future episodes were pre-recorded, you will hear references to New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education, also known as NJCIE, which has since undergone a name change to All In for Inclusive Education. Please note that, although it has a new name, All In for Inclusive Education is still doing its usual awesome things. On this episode, I welcome my guests Rachael Graves and Mary Rose Pullo, who are mathematics teachers at Mainland Regional High School. Rachael and Mary Rose join me today to discuss the necessary steps that need to be taken to eliminate resource rooms in high schools and why it may not be as difficult as you may think. I would like to welcome everyone back to another episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast, brought to you by New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education, NJCIE. I am your host, Arthur Aston, and we are back with a new episode today. And I would like to welcome my guest, Mary Rose Pullo and Rachael Graves. So thank you both for joining me today. It's great to have you on, and I'm glad to see you both are in the same location.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yes. So this new season of the podcast, we are highlighting a lot of the presenters who presented at our summer conference back in June. And so both of you did present at our conference. And I would like to start the podcast off by having you introduce yourself and telling us a little bit about what you do and how you became interested in the world of inclusive education.
I've been teaching for over 20 years. And when I originally started teaching, I was actually in my early 40s, coming out of the computer industry as a mathematician. A few years into my teaching, they asked me to teach Algebra 1 with an inclusion, in an inclusion classroom. Quite frankly, I didn't think I could do it, but I actually never looked back after we got there. So over the course of time, I've really only had a few co-teachers. Rachael has been my co-teacher for 10 years now, I guess, something like 10 years now. And through many discussions and debates and arguments and whatnot, we've really come up with what we think is a really good way of educating all students. And we just, and I think that probably one of the biggest things is that we don't lower our standards. We give everybody the opportunity to learn the maximum amount of information that they possibly can, and just give and know that it's possible. That's like the biggest thing, is to actually know that it's possible. About a year and a half ago, the idea of actually having complete inclusion, which means eliminating the idea of resource rooms, was suggested by a consultant that came into our building. And we thought about it for a while and said, okay, fine, we can give this a shot. Because I don't know, after thinking, and I shouldn't say that like now I'm not so sure what we were thinking then, because things have changed since then, because it actually worked. I think that there was a lot of debate as to whether or not it made sense, and how we would actually pull that off. And, but that's hence the name of our workshop was a small perspective change, because that is really what it comes down to. You just have to appreciate the fact that it really doesn't matter what classroom somebody's sitting in, they can learn, and putting them in a small, what I call solitary confinement, is not necessarily the best situation for them to learn. And that's kind of how we got here today.
Well, I'm Rachael Graves, and this is my 15th year of teaching, I think. I didn't intend to go into education. It was more of a strong suggestion from my dad. And he was an alternate school principal. So he was like, I've seen this with a lot of people. They go to school for something else, they go back for education. So like, you should just go for education. And I said, all right, whatever. So I did that. And then when my school offered a special education certification, like as an elective option. And he's like, you should get that. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. And he said, well, you're going to. So he told me to do that. And then I was like, I want to teach elementary. And then I graduated, and one of the high school my dad worked for, they were like, hey, we'll give you a job if you start a lacrosse team. And I said, okay. So I ended up in high school as an inclusion teacher. And that's what I've been doing since. So it was kind of like, I don't know, it's just like opportunities presented themselves. And I thought teaching math would be fun. And so I was wrong, but but it's been an experience. And it's taken me a while to get here where I'm like, oh, this is good. Like, I like what I'm doing, but I do like what I'm doing. And I think it is because we've kind of like shifted our gears into like our new inclusive environment. And it's made my day more enjoyable. And I think the kids' days are more enjoyable. And I like have enjoyed my job since we've kind of like switched gears. So that's how I ended up where I am.
That's great. I like to hear how, how people got to where they are. Yes. And just, and like you said, it may not have been your original plan of how you wanted to, what you wanted to do. But now that you're there and you're doing it and you've been doing it for quite some time, it's, you enjoy it. And I like what you said that, you don't lower the standards for your students, right. But you realize you work with them to figure out how is the best way they can, understand and learn the material. And I will admit, math was not my best subject in school. I didn't understand it. But as I did get older and got into college, actually, I, had somewhat of an understanding of the different, and of all classes, it was a statistics class. So,
my least favorite math.
yes. So can you both share what does inclusive education mean to you? How would you define inclusive education?
So I think we've taken the approach that inclusive education is giving everyone the opportunity to experience everything. And then, like we said, like not lowering that standard, but allowing them to work to the best of their ability with their peers. So we've eliminated that resource room, which means that these students are with their peers and doing what their peers are doing. But they might have some modifications or accommodations if necessary to meet their peers where they are. So I think it's meeting their peers where they are, and giving them that opportunity to be equals with them, so they don't feel different. And that's been like a huge thing for us this year.
Because while how it's interesting to say, like, because we call in the industry, we call this stuff in differentiated education or differentiated curriculum or differentiated this or differentiated that. But basically, and I guess the only thing that we have that's differentiated is our expectations. So, because I don't want anybody to feel different. And they really don't. I mean, like every once in a while, someone will go, well, why is he doing this and I'm doing that? And I said, well, I don't know. Why do you eat peanut butter and he eats chicken? It's just like, it's okay. We don't all have to actually be doing exactly the same thing to accomplish the goal at the end, but that is what it is. It's actually not being different. That is the ultimate goal of inclusion.
Yeah, that's great.
And I think our students, that was the biggest change for them, is a lot of them said, like, I'm no longer in special education. And like, they were excited that they weren't in special ed classes. And they liked that they were doing what everyone else was doing. And like we said, it's not that when you differentiate, this has been our biggest issue for years, is like, and this is the question I get from everyone. And I think this is what holds people back, is when you differentiate, you're like, I'm going to have a class within a class, And we've like wondered, how do you do that? How do you teach 2 classes? And that's the perspective change we had, is that you're not teaching 2 classes, is you are providing the supports in the class you already have.
Yes.
And then those students aren't in a class within a class. And I think that's what people struggle with. So that's what has made our classroom work, is we finally realized, no, we're not bringing a different class in, we're just going to modify the supports we get in that class. So that's helped us.
One of the things that's actually like allowed this to come into play is something that was established inside of the regular ed classroom long before we ever did this. And that was also something that is not necessarily agreed upon by everyone, but we basically took what this course is and looked at everything that the state suggests that one should learn in this course. And i.e. that being that is the curriculum for any course, because that's really the way you're supposed to teach. And broke it down, and rather than, I don't know, we took out some of the typical buzzwords like units and sections and page 72 and, whatnot, so that it was literally just the topic or the concept, and that had a very specific name to it. Rather than unit 1, it really was, solving systems of equations. So all of the ideas were put together in scales. We'll say this, and we said, okay, fine. In order to accomplish mastery, we'll call it, in this particular area or that particular area, these are the things that you have to be able to do, and you're working towards doing those things. And that's how we evaluated every student, was their progress towards working towards that overall goal. And that was a dynamic thing. You didn't have to do it by Friday, because if you just got someplace by Friday, and somebody got to let's say had greater understanding on Friday than you did, it didn't matter, because next Friday your understanding would go up, and we weren't competing with other students. It was just, you just need to try to get to as close to the top of this ladder as you can. But I did that with regular ed kids. Well, that in itself just falls right into place in the inclusion environment, because that's the same thing you're doing with any child who has a learning disability in any capacity, because you're just basically asking them to continue to try to climb the ladder towards mastering this topic or that topic along the way. And I'm not putting necessarily like this time frame on there that says, if you don't do it by here, you're done. It's just, let's do the best you can, and when you get here, and then if you haven't reached the top by that, then we'll continue, we'll try again next week. That is a part that teachers really struggle with, because they're on a time schedule. Everything is very structured. You cannot do this and be structured. Like, the structure is very flexible, but there's structure to it, but it's incredibly flexible. So.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking like, wow, that takes off a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
It really relieves a lot of pressure. I felt myself getting calm even. I was like, wow. It's like, wow, that's really great. Like, we'll try to reach the top, and if we don't, we'll try it again. Like, it's not, having that flexibility is a great message, a really great message to send. And as we've mentioned, you both co-presented at our summer inclusion conference presented by NJCIE back in June, which is hard to believe that was in June already. And the title of your presentation was "A Small Perspective Change Can Eliminate Resource Room in High School." So can you both share why you feel it is important to eliminate resource rooms at the high school level?
So this was actually, as a special education teacher, this was something I pushed back a little bit about, because I think we are comfortable with what we know, and we see success by what we think success looks like in a resource room. I thought my students were being successful, so for me to pull them from that environment where I know I've seen them in like a inclusion setting where they struggled, and then I saw them in a resource room setting where I thought they did a lot better. It was hard for me to see the merit in eliminating the resource room. But Mary Rose and Bonnie, our inclusion specialist, they one day they were like, why don't you think this is successful? And it was the conversation we had where they were saying to me, like, you just have this definition of success, but your students feel successful. What they're doing looks like success. And that was the conversation we had where your definition of success as a teacher might need to shift, because we're used to one thing, and success can look like many different things, but you have to change your perspective on what that might be, and not lowering the bar, but just what does that look like in a inclusion class versus a resource room class? And is there a benefit to them being secluded from their peers versus being in that room? Are they learning more? And we realized, no, they're not. Like, they're actually learning more in an inclusion setting, because we're not limiting what they're exposed to or what we're teaching or modifying the curriculum. So that success, what you think success looks like, needs to be different. And that was a big perspective change for me.
Yes. She hit the nail on the head. I mean, I could continue to talk, but I would just be being repetitive. But there were many conversations that Rachel and I had. We should call them arguments, debates, behind a closed door, where she was like, I don't know how this is going to work, like, and I can't suggest that I did either. Like, that wasn't necessarily the case. I just was bound and determined to see what we could do. And that one day when we started talking about that, I was just like, well, why is it you think that they're not successful? And it was like, oh yeah, I guess that's right. And that's where we got the small perspective change, because it really is just a matter of, because as teachers, again, it's a structured, they have to do this in order for them to have accomplished what I want them to accomplish. And here's the big thing, that was what I want them to accomplish. And that's not necessarily necessary. Just because I want you to do it doesn't necessarily make it right or necessary.
Yes.
And those are the different things. It's like, and that's where that flexibility comes in, and say, okay, fine. Like, it's like, can you broaden what success might look like, knowing that, because by the same token, I also might have wider expectations, or for a student who is actually is of higher learning, and I might ask them to do a little bit more, or ask them, or provide them with something else, because otherwise I'm actually like diminishing their potential for success if I don't enrich what they're doing. Do you know what I mean? Because it works at both ends of the spectrum.
Yes, that is I like what you were saying, Rachel, that being in special education, you've had that your way of thinking and understanding things, and and switching is always it's so difficult to make change, to do change. Yeah, so especially when you learn things a certain way, and we're taught that this is the best option for the students, it's difficult to change perspectives. But what would I wrote, what are 3 ways, but you can give as many as you'd like. What are 3 ways that educators can change their perspective in the classroom that can most benefit not just students with disabilities, but all the students in the classroom?
So I think when we talk about this, a lot of people think it needs to be this, and we did too. It's going to be a lot of work, and it is work, but it's going to be this huge change to everything you've done in your classroom. So a lot of people I've talked to are like, this is impossible. I don't have the time. And what we realized is what you're doing is changing what success looks like. And when we say that, what we mean is students that are struggling to be successful, they might need help from a classroom aide or one of us when they are working on something. And if they can do that with assistance, that might be what their A looks like in your class. And so we really talk about, like, when we talk about levels of understanding, we've shifted to independence level for students. So instead of, you have to learn this, 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 and this to get an A, we've shifted to, we're going to give you everything, but can you do it independently? And that independence level is different for the students in our class. So some of our students, they're not going to be able to do it from memory. So that wouldn't make sense to make that the A. Like our general education students, because of the way the state is and the testing, sure, that's their grading. But we modify the grading for other students if necessary. And that is an A might be you need to use your notes or an example. And that's fine, because really, if you can like use the notebooks we've created for you, or look on like Delta Math at the examples, or IXL the examples we've given, and do that, like that's great. Like, and you can do it by yourself with notes. That's wonderful. Or a, B might be, or an A for some students might be, yeah, you get an adult help in the class or a student that helps you.
Yeah, we've tried different methods of where we would say, like, where we would talk about going from, a C to an A, if you're using that as your measure, as in terms of using depth of understanding of a particular topic, and did not necessarily find that to be as effective because people kind of got hung up in the lack of, and just never bothered to experience the depth. Whereas now we just put the depth at the C level and say, okay, fine, can you experience the depth? Do you know what I mean? With help, because eventually you do become independent, really do. Like, and I mean, most everybody does to some degree. And my perspective, again, for all math teachers out there, regular ed math teachers out there, is that if you ask 90% of the adult population that are not engineers, if they remember much about how to do X, Y, Z in Algebra 1, they're going to tell you no. And if they could have done it before, they probably say, well, probably if I looked it up, I could figure it out. And, what you want is you want people to learn how to reconnect with material. That in itself is a big deal, to be able to actually look something up to figure out how to do it. That is a skill that I think has more merit than necessarily than memorizing, a bunch of things that you'll forget tomorrow.
I'm going to start using that in my everyday life to reconnect to the material. That is perfect. And that's so true. It's like, yeah, if I see something, it's, you see it on the internet all the time. They have those math equations that you're remembering the, what order of operation you do first, and it all comes back to you when you see it. So that's, it's like, yeah, that's really so true, and so great for you to mention that. So
and that's like, I want to say, because like Rachel's even better at this than I am, because we tell everybody that this is the order with which you do things. You look at it and say, do I know how to do this? And then if you say to yourself, no, I don't know how to do this, the next thing that you do is you either, if you're using a computer, you look at an example that you might find on the computer, or you go, because we have the students build what we call a resource notebook that has all of the information, not a notebook that they do work in. It's purely for resources. And then we say, okay, fine, get your notebook, because then they can look it up, and it would be an example that they had actually worked on. You do that until you get to the point where I still can't do this. That's the point where you say, can you give me a little bit of a verbal prompt? But you don't go for the verbal prompt first, because that's really what the cheating part is. Or not so much cheating, but that's where you're shortchanging yourself. But if you need the verbal prompt, that's okay. I mean, it's okay until you don't need it anymore. And that's what we're talking about in terms of being independent. It's independently being able to do something. And it doesn't really matter what the something is, which is why this can be carried across all curriculums. There's no, it's not exclusive to a math curriculum. As a matter of fact, we aren't quite sure why we started in math anyway. It probably was better off in, like, I don't know, history or something. It's just that nobody in history was willing to give it a shot. So
right. Oh, well, thank you both for this great conversation. It's been really great to to hear how you're doing things there in your classroom, and the fact that you two have been working together for so long. I'm sure that always helps with understanding and making things work, and just the way that you have adapted your your classroom to help all learners, and make it beneficial and making math, I'm sure, a little bit more fun for everybody.
Less stressful.
Yes, definitely less stressful. I really appreciated that. And I was like, wow, that's cool that you can, the flexibility, I think, is a really big, message that I got from this conversation. And it's so important because we like to think things are supposed to go one way. And then it's like, it's okay if it doesn't. We have to, shift gears a little bit and we'll still make it work and the students will still learn, which is, the goal of, one of the goals of everything. So, thank you both for this great conversation and taking the time to meet with me. And yes, so
Alrighty.
you all have a great day.
You too. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. We thank you for listening to this episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast. This podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Stay tuned for new episodes of the podcast premiering every 2 weeks. We're all in. Are you?